contract was 3 inches thick and completely heartless. Lena Hart stared at it across the polished obsidian desk, her hands folded tightly in her lap to keep them from shaking. The office around her was all glass, steel, and money, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, minimalist art that probably cost more than her apartment building, and behind the desk, the man who had just offered to marry her like it was a business acquisition. Alexander Cross, billionaire, tech magnate, emotional glacier, her soon-to-be husband, on paper. "This is strictly legal," Alexander said calmly, sliding the document closer to her with 2 precise fingers. "No romance, no expectations, no interference in each other's personal lives." His voice was smooth, controlled, the kind that had convinced investors to hand him billions without blinking. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, no tie, dark hair brushed back like nothing in the world could unsettle him. Lena swallowed. "Then why me?" Alexander's jaw tightened for half a second, so fast most people would miss it. "She didn't." "Because you're intelligent, discreet, and desperate enough to consider it," he replied bluntly. "Ouch." She exhaled slowly. "At least you're honest. I don't have time to be anything else." Lena leaned back in the chair, eyes scanning the first page. Marriage agreement stared back at her in bold type. 12 months. 1 year. In exchange for financial security, medical coverage for her mother, and a trust fund that would ensure Lena never had to beg again. It was absurd. It was humiliating. It was the only option she had left. "This is for your inheritance, right?" she asked quietly. Alexander's eyes sharpened. "My grandfather's will requires me to be married for 1 year to retain controlling interest in Cross Industries. So I'm a placeholder. A solution," he corrected, "a mutually beneficial one." She laughed softly, more disbelief than humor. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said. "You won't fall in love with me." Something about the certainty in his tone stung more than it should have. "And you won't fall in love with me?" she asked. His gaze held hers, cool and unwavering. "That's not how I'm wired." Lena should have stood up then, should have walked out with her pride intact. Instead, she picked up the pen. "Okay," she said quietly. 1 year, paper marriage, nothing else." Alexander nodded once. "Good." She signed. The moment the pen left the paper, something shifted in the room, subtle, almost imperceptible. The air felt heavier, more charged. Alexander stood. "We'll announce the engagement next week. You'll move into the penthouse tonight." "Tonight?" Lena echoed. "Yes." His gaze dropped briefly, to her mouth, then back to her eyes. "Appearances matter." That was the first line he crossed. She noticed it. He didn't seem to. The penthouse was stunning. It was also terrifying. Lena stood in the master bedroom, their bedroom, staring at the king-sized bed that looked untouched, immaculate, unused. "There are 2 bedrooms," Alexander said from the doorway. "You can choose whichever you prefer." Relief washed through her. "Thank you." He hesitated. "Just a fraction. This arrangement," he said carefully, "will work best if we maintain boundaries." "Agreed," she replied quickly. "I don't want confusion." He nodded, but his gaze lingered again. Longer this time. That was the second line. Days passed. Public appearances. Polite smiles. A diamond ring so large it felt like a lie wrapped around her finger. Headlines exploded. Billionaire heir off the market. At home they were strangers. Until they weren't. It started small, late-night conversations over coffee neither of them admitted to needing. A shared laugh when she teased him about eating like a robot. The way Alexander noticed when she was tired, when she was quiet, and the way he started standing too close. One night, Lena found him in the kitchen at 2 a.m. Sleeves rolled up, tie discarded. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "No," he said. Then after a pause, "You?" She shook her head. Silence stretched. "You don't belong here," he said suddenly. Her chest tightened. "I know. That's not what I meant," he said quietly. He stepped closer, too close. This time she felt it. The heat, the tension, the thing they were not supposed to have. "Alexander," she whispered, "this is a paper marriage." His jaw clenched. "I know," he said, but his hand lifted anyway, and when his fingers brushed her wrist, just barely, Lena realized the truth far more dangerous than any contract. The marriage might have been fake, but his restraint was starting to fail. The penthouse was quiet, the city below glowing like a web of stars, indifferent to everything that happened inside. Lena stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, wrapped in the silk robe Alexander had provided, feeling more like a guest in her own life than the fiancé she was legally bound to be. Her fingers traced the fabric, wondering if she had made a mistake signing that contract. Alexander leaned against the doorway, hands tucked into his suit pockets. He didn't say anything at first. He rarely did, preferring to study rather than speak, but she could feel his presence like heat radiating from an invisible source. It was subtle, but impossible to ignore. "Do you always stand there staring at the skyline?" he asked finally, his voice low, smooth, and sharp as a scalpel. "I like the view," she said, forcing casualness she didn't feel. "It makes the world seem quieter." He pushed off from the doorway and came closer, boots silent against the hardwood floor. Lena's pulse quickened, not because she feared him, but because the air between them seemed charged, the quiet promising more than just conversation. "You're nervous," he observed. "You think this is temporary, that it will end badly. He stiffened. "It's a contract. Of course I'm nervous." He stopped just a few feet away, eyes fixed on her. "Contracts are supposed to be clear-cut. Rules, boundaries. We're professionals." Lena tilted her head, noting how the faint light from the city reflected off his sharp cheekbones. She tried to keep her tone level. "And yet you keep crossing them." Alexander's lips twitched. Was it a smirk or a warning? "I don't cross lines," he said, carefully measured. "I merely adjust to reality." Her heart tripped in her chest. Reality, him, that word, that presence, carried something she couldn't yet name, something dangerous. The first night was deceptively simple. They maintained distance, slept in separate rooms, and followed the agreed rules meticulously. But Lena had learned quickly that proximity was deceptive. Alexander's attention was magnetic. His subtle observations, the way he remembered little details she hadn't spoken aloud, made her feel exposed in ways no stranger should. And yet she couldn't look away. Breakfast the next morning was a performance, both polite, both smiling, both aware of the world watching if anyone noticed the billionaire with his fiancée. But when their hands brushed reaching for the same cup of coffee, electricity shot through her in a way the contract didn't account for. Lena jerked her hand back, embarrassed, but not fast enough to escape the lingering warmth of his touch. Alexander's gaze followed her, calculating, unreadable. "Coffee?" he asked, raising an eyebrow, though there was amusement there. Dangerous amusement. She nodded, heart thudding.
"Yes, you're very reactive," he said, voice low enough that it sent shivers down her spine.
"Do you know why?" "No," she admitted, keeping her gaze firmly on the cup she now clutched like a lifeline. "Because," he said, stepping closer until the heat from his body brushed hers, "you're pretending boundaries exist. But they don't when proximity stirs. Things." Lena's stomach tightened. She had no words. Nothing in the contract or in any self-respecting logic allowed her to feel like this. Days passed. Each movement, each casual glance, each accidental brush of his hand became a game of restraint, and a battle she didn't realize she wanted to lose. The media praised their chemistry, and business associates commented on their compatibility. But Lena knew the truth. There was nothing compatible about it. Nothing except the way Alexander's presence made her pulse race and her mind short-circuit. One evening, After a gala that had left her exhausted and faintly nauseated in a designer gown that clung in all the wrong places, she returned to the penthouse to find Alexander already there, tie discarded, sleeves rolled up, a look of controlled menace that made her knees weak. "You're late," he said simply, though there was no anger in his voice, only scrutiny. "I had to endure 3 hours of being praised as your perfect match," she said, half joking. Her voice trembled despite her attempt at levity. He stepped closer, slowly, deliberately. And it reminded me why this arrangement is insane," she admitted, her hands twisted in her dress, suddenly aware of every inch of exposed skin, every flutter of pulse beneath silk. Alexander's eyes darkened. "Insane?" he echoed, his voice lowered, almost a growl. "Or irresistible?" Her breath hitched. That line, those words, crossed boundaries she had never considered she had. A single step and he was impossibly close. The faint scent of his cologne, sharp and woody, wrapped around her like a trap. She began, but words failed her. "Shh," he whispered, and before she could protest, his fingers traced lightly along her jawline, stopping just short of her lips. The contact was gentle, teasing, but it carried a force that made her knees weak and her mind foggy. "This," he said softly, "is what happens when contracts try to contain reality." Lena's pulse thundered. She wanted to pull away. She should pull away. But the warmth in his gaze and the commanding pull of his presence pinned her in place. "You can't," she whispered, shaking her head. Us can't happen." Alexander's hand hovered for a heartbeat before he let it drop slowly, deliberately, showing restraint, just enough to tease her. "Can't or won't?" he asked, voice low and husky. "Because I'm discovering I won't, and I suspect you won't either." Her throat went dry. He leaned closer, close enough that she could feel the heat of his breath against her cheek, but not so close as to cross a line. "Yet, I warned you," he said, voice soft but dangerous. "Paper marriage, real feelings. Rules are fragile things, Lena, and I never intended to play by them." Her knees shook slightly, and she realized she was trembling, not from cold but from him, from proximity, from the raw, undeniable tension. Her mind raced, logic colliding with something far stronger than reason. This was supposed to be a transaction, a one-year experiment in legality, appearances, and convenience. And yet here she was, standing mere inches from Alexander Cross, aware that a single misstep, one accidental touch, one shared glance, could unravel the contract entirely, could unravel her carefully maintained resolve, could make her heart betray her. The first line had been crossed when he let his presence fill the space around her. The second when his fingers brushed her wrist. And now he was standing so close, eyes locked on hers, voice husky with something she couldn't define, that Lena realized she might already have lost. She should have walked away. She should have demanded he keep his distance. She should have reminded herself that this was a paper marriage, nothing more, but she didn't, because Alexander Cross was no longer just a contract partner. He was a force of nature, and Lena knew with both fear and a thrill she couldn't deny that the line he crossed tonight, just barely, teasingly, dangerously, was only the beginning. The next morning, Lena woke to sunlight streaming through the penthouse windows, dusting Alexander's face with gold. She froze for a moment, heart skipping. He was sitting at the breakfast bar, reading a financial report like he owned the world, which, in truth, he probably did. But she didn't move. She didn't want to disturb the calm, calculated perfection he exuded. "You're awake," he said without looking up, voice low and neutral. But she noticed the subtle inflection, the kind that suggested he had been watching her. "Yes," she murmured, sitting on the edge of the bed, robe loosely tied, hair tousled from restless sleep. "I don't snore." Alexander glanced at her briefly, lips twitching as if debating whether to smile. Then he returned to the report. Good. The tension between them didn't dissipate overnight. If anything, it had thickened, tangible and oppressive, like a storm waiting to break. Lena poured herself coffee, hands shaking slightly. She could feel his gaze following her every movement. Each step, each sip, was a reminder that paper marriages might be legal, but human chemistry didn't obey contracts. Breakfast was eaten in silence, the air charged with an unspoken awareness. Alexander's focus flicked between the report and her, assessing, calculating. Lena noticed the way his sleeve rode up just enough to reveal a sliver of tanned wrist, or how his jaw tightened subtly whenever she moved. Every detail, every nuance, sent pulses of heat through her she couldn't explain. Aft. A breakfast. Alexander suggested a walk to the company's art gallery opening downtown. He insisted it was necessary for appearances, and Lena had no choice but to agree. She could have said no, of course, but one look at his expression, a careful mask that barely concealed that rare flash of emotion, and she realized defiance would accomplish nothing. In the car, the distance between them was minimal. Leather seats, climate-controlled, and yet the tension was palpable. Lena caught herself observing him, his profile, the sharp line of his nose, the way his hands gripped the steering wheel, strong and deliberate. "You're quiet," Alexander said suddenly, voice soft but with an edge that made her heart stutter. "I'm taking it all in," she replied carefully, aware that her tone was far too breathless. "I see," he said, eyes on the road. "And are you enjoying the view?" Lena blinked. "Excuse me?" He smirked faintly. "You're looking at me." Heat flared to her cheeks. I wasn't—" "Of course not," he interrupted smoothly, though the corner of his mouth hinted at amusement. "I'm merely noting a pattern." By the time they arrived, Lena felt like her pulse had doubled. The gallery was full of influential clients and society figures, all expecting them to be perfect, untouchable, untangled from the messiness of emotion. Lena smiled professionally, aware of the press and the cameras. Alexander moved beside her like a shadow, protective, authoritative, but still teasing in subtle danger. Owl's ways. Throughout the evening, she caught glimpses of the man beyond the billionaire. The way he lingered when a client mispronounced her name, the faint flash of humor when she corrected someone politely, the careful, almost imperceptible glance toward her whenever conversation allowed. And then it happened, a minor mishap, a spilled glass of wine, a waiter colliding into her slightly. Lena's heart jumped, instincts flaring. But Alexander was already there. His hand brushed hers, not in a polite, professional way, but in a possessive, grounding gesture that stopped her in place. "Careful," he murmured, low and intimate, a statement and a warning all at once. The heat in her chest roared. The words weren't important. His proximity was enough to make her knees feel like cotton. "Alexander," she whispered, almost involuntarily. "Yes?" His voice was velvet wrapped in steel. You shouldn't." "I know," he said, and then he did something she had not expected. He held her hand briefly, just enough to guide her past the mess, but long enough for her to feel the force of him, the undeniable pull between them. The gallery was a blur after that. Lena moved automatically, caught between nerves and fascination, aware that every small touch, every glance, every faint brush of fingers was rewriting the rules she had promised to follow. Back in the car, neither spoke for a long stretch. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was electric, loaded with things neither dared to voice aloud. Finally, Lena broke it. "Why do you do that?" "Do what?" he asked, glancing briefly at her. "The hand, the touches, the way you get close and then don't. You tease me." Alexander's gaze hardened ever so slightly, a storm contained in his dark eyes. "Because I can," he said bluntly. "Because you respond. Because it's the only honest part of this arrangement. You shouldn't be doing this," Lena whispered, voice trembling despite her composure. "Perhaps," he replied, But rules are fragile. They bend when people can't follow them. Her chest tightened. I don't want to bend. No? His voice dropped an octave, laced with something she wasn't prepared for. Desire? Warning? Both? She couldn't tell. She stopped herself, realizing she had no words. Logic, reason, professionalism, all the things she had relied on to survive this paper marriage, crumbled the moment he looked at her like that. Alexander leaned closer, almost dangerously close, the heat of him filling the small space of the car. You can resist, he said, voice low and deliberate. But I can't pretend anymore. Not with you. Lena swallowed hard. She could feel it. The magnetic pull between them, a force that defied contracts, rules, logic, or good sense. She wanted to protest, to remind him of the agreement they had signed, to keep boundaries intact. And yet, she couldn't. Because the moment he reached out, brushing her cheek lightly with his thumb, intentional, intimate teasing, her resolve shattered. The car. Silent again. Neither moved, neither spoke. Yet everything had shifted. A line had been crossed, not violently, not irreversibly, but enough to ignite a fire she hadn't expected to feel. And deep down, Lena knew this. Their paper marriage was no longer just a contract. It had become something real, something dangerous, something irresistible. Alexander Cross had crossed the line, and Lena, despite every rational thought in her head, was beginning to hope he wouldn't stop. The penthouse was quiet, too quiet. Lena sat on the edge of the sofa, knees tucked under her chin, staring at the city lights like they could somehow answer the questions twisting in her chest. Her mind raced, recalling the subtle brush of Alexander's thumb against her cheek in the car, the way his voice had dropped an octave, the way his presence had suddenly filled every corner of her awareness. She was supposed to resist him, supposed to remind herself this was a paper marriage, a business arrangement, a contract, nothing more, and yet every instinct screamed in opposition. The sound of the front door opening made her jump. Alexander entered, suit jacket discarded, tie loosened, hands in his pockets. He didn't immediately speak. Instead, he moved slowly, deliberately, like a predator circling prey, or more dangerously, like someone who had already decided the outcome. You were thinking about it, he said quietly, eyes dark and intense. I am not, Lena stammered, though her racing heartbeat betrayed you are, he said. I can see it. Every shift in your posture, every hesitation. You're thinking about last night, about the touch, about me. Heat surged through her. She could feel it in her cheeks, her chest, the way her hands gripped the blanket around her legs. You're imagining things, she whispered. Alexander moved closer, close enough for her to feel the warmth radiating from him, close enough for her to smell his cologne, faintly spicy, distinctly him. His presence made the room shrink. It made her pulse spike. It made the contract feel like paper being shredded before her eyes. I'm not, he said, not imagining. I know you. I can read you like a book, Lena. And right now, you're terrified and excited and curious, all at once. Her chest tightened. This is wrong, we can't. And yet, he interrupted softly, leaning so close that her words faltered. You feel it too. Don't lie to yourself. I've seen it. I see it in every stolen glance, every breath you take when I move near. Lena's throat went dry. She tried to look away, to remind herself that this was a contract, that he was a billionaire, that this was not real. But his gaze held her, dark and magnetic, drawing her closer even when she refused to step forward. Then, he did something completely unexpected. He sat beside her, close enough that their knees brushed, not deliberately intimate, not forceful, just close enough that the warmth from his body pressed against hers. Lena's heart thudded. Her hand tightened around the blanket. Alexander, she whispered. You're trembling, he said softly. And it's not fear of me, is it? Her breath hitched. "I don't know," she admitted, voice barely audible. Alexander tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that made her feel like she'd been stripped bare. "You're terrified," he said quietly. "Because if you give in, there's no turning back." "And if I don't?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Then I'll respect the contract," he replied smoothly. But there was a hint of something darker in his eyes, a promise he didn't voice, a challenge. Silence stretched between them, thick and potent. Then, almost imperceptibly, he leaned just a fraction closer. His knee brushed hers again, longer this time. His hand hovered near hers, suspended in the air, teasing, testing boundaries. Lena's pulse thundered in her ears. She wanted to pull back. She wanted to maintain the safety of the contract. She wanted to scream at herself for letting proximity feel like this. But she didn't. She couldn't. Because Alexander's gaze held her, commanding yet careful, as if daring her to fight while simultaneously ensuring she wouldn't fall too far. "You don't know what you want," he murmured. "Not yet. Maybe I do," she whispered. His eyes darkened. "Do you? She broke off, realizing her words had no meaning. They were just sounds floating in the air, powerless against the tension binding them together. Alexander's hand moved, just slightly, just enough, to brush a stray strand of hair from her face. The gesture was gentle, almost tender, yet it carried an undeniable weight, a force that spoke of desire, control, and something far more dangerous, real feeling. "You're beautiful," he said softly, "even when you try to pretend you're not affected." Lena's breath caught, her throat closed, her hands shook, and in that moment she realized, horrifyingly and thrillingly, that she had already felt it. She had already crossed the line in her mind, if not yet in action. "You can't," she whispered again, though the words lacked conviction. "I can," he replied simply, and he did. Alexander leaned closer, closer than the contract allowed, closer than etiquette dictated, closer than she had thought possible. His hand brushed hers, not fully touching, just barely grazing, but enough to make her pulse race, to make her senses flare, to make her question everything she had ever believed about boundaries, contracts, and control. Lena's resolve faltered, because the line had been crossed. Not violently, not irreversibly, but enough to ignite something she hadn't planned for, something that could grow dangerous if left unchecked. "You're dangerous," she whispered. "I'm not," he said, voice low, intimate. "I'm inevitable." Her chest tightened. She wanted to resist, to remind him of the rules, the contract, the professionalism that had supposedly defined their arrangement. But the warmth of his body, the heat of his gaze, and the undeniable pull between them made her words falter. And when his hand finally brushed hers again, deliberately this time, lingering just long enough to send a jolt through her, Lena knew the truth. Their paper marriage, supposedly safe, detached, legal, was no longer just a piece of paper. It was a dangerous, electrifying trap, and Alexander had crossed the line. Lena realized with both fear and anticipation that she didn't want him to stop, because deep down, she already knew she was in too far. The lines between contract, duty, and desire had blurred. The paper marriage had become something real, something alive, and nothing would ever be the same. The penthouse was silent, but it was a heavy silence, charged, suffocating, impossible to ignore. Lena sat on the sofa, knees tucked to her chest, staring at the floor. She felt like the weight of the city below had pressed its way into the apartment, into her chest, into her heartbeat. Alexander leaned against the window frame, arms crossed, watching her like a predator who knew exactly how close the prey was to surrendering. But this time, Lena realized, it wasn't just a game. This was him. Not the billionaire facade, not the calculated businessman, but the man who had, subtly, deliberately, erased every safe boundary they had tried to maintain. You're thinking about it again, he said softly. I'm not, she whispered, even though her body betrayed her. Her pulse raced, her hands trembled, and her breath came in uneven bursts. He stepped closer, boots quiet against the hardwood. Yes, you are, he said, voice low, dark, intimate. You're thinking about last night, about our hands brushing, about the moment I leaned too close and you felt it too. Her chest tightened. She closed her eyes, trying to fight the memory, but it was no use. His presence, his scent, the way he moved in calculated proximity, consumed her. Alexander, she murmured, her voice trembling. We can't. This is a contract. And yet, he said, closing the distance between them, you feel what's real, don't you? Despite the paper, despite every rule you've told yourself to follow. Her breath caught. How did he always know? How did he see straight through every layer she built around herself? She stopped, words failing her. He took a step closer, another, each movement deliberate, magnetic, pulling her into a gravity she hadn't thought she'd ever fall into. And then, finally, he reached for her hand. Not a teasing brush, not a fleeting touch. This time his fingers intertwined with hers, firm and possessive, sending a shiver that ran straight to her core. You're mine, he whispered, almost reverently, yet with the authority that made her pulse leap. I'm not, she began, but the words died on her lips, lost in the intensity of his gaze. You are, if only for tonight, he corrected softly, if only by choice, by desire, by everything neither of us can pretend doesn't exist anymore. Her knees weakened. She wanted to pull away, to scream, to demand space, but her body betrayed her. Every nerve, every instinct, every suppressed desire surged forward. Alexander leaned closer, careful, deliberate. The air between them was a live wire. Lena felt her pulse race, heart hammering. Every breath he took seemed to sync with hers. I'm not going to force you, he said, voice low, velvety, controlled. Not because I can't, but because I won't. This has to be your choice too. Her chest heaved. Her fingers curled around his, reluctant to let go. Shh, he murmured. Just feel it. The world narrowed. It was just the two of them. Just warmth and tension, desire and restraint, possibility and inevitability. He leaned closer, his forehead resting lightly against hers. Do you feel it? He asked. Yes, she whispered. Simple, undeniable, honest. Then say it, he said. Say it out loud. Say what you feel. Her voice trembled, raw and fragile, but the words surged anyway. I want this. I want you. Alexander's lips curved, half smirk, half relief, fully dangerous. Good, he breathed. Because I've wanted you from the moment I signed that contract. Her heart skipped, even knowing it was supposed to be nothing, especially because it was supposed to be nothing, he said. Everything I've tried to control, everything I've told myself I wouldn't feel, it all disappears around you. The distance vanished. Alexander captured her lips with his own, gentle at first, testing, teasing, then claiming, firm and insistent. Lena's body arched instinctively, responding to a heat she hadn't known she could feel without warning. Her hands found their way to his chest, feeling the solid strength beneath the fabric, grounding herself even as desire threatened to pull her under completely. The kiss deepened. It was no longer about rules or contracts or appearances. It was about real feelings, raw, unfiltered, dangerous, the kind of feeling the paper couldn't contain, the kind the city below could never dictate. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Lena rested her forehead against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. You crossed every line, she whispered. Alexander chuckled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I didn't just cross them, he said. I erased them. She looked up at him, eyes wide. And now, what? Now, he said, cupping her face in his hands, we write our own rules, together. Paper or no paper, contract or no contract. I want you, all of you. And I don't want to wait another second. Lena's chest tightened. She realized, with both fear and exhilaration, that she felt exactly the same. This wasn't safe. This wasn't logical. But it was real. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. Then, we're together, she asked, almost shyly, almost afraid to speak it aloud. Alexander smiled, dark and tender all at once. Why? Together. And this time, it's not just on paper. She laughed softly, a sound full of relief and disbelief. So, real feelings, huh? Real feelings, he confirmed. And I've crossed every line to prove it. For the first time since the contract had been signed, Lena felt alive. Not because of promises, obligations, or financial security, but because someone had seen her, really seen her, and chosen her. Because someone had risked everything for something more than a contract. The city lights below seemed to shine brighter now, a reflection of the new reality between them. The walls of the penthouse, the silence, the luxury, all of it faded into the background. There was only Lena and Alexander, only desire and trust, only a paper marriage that had become something neither could have predicted. That night, Lena learned the truth. Contracts might dictate obligations, but they could not contain hearts. Rules could be written, boundaries established, and promises made. But real feelings? Real feelings always crossed the line, and Alexander had already done that. She smiled against his chest, feeling warmth and certainty for the first time in her life. Yes, she whispered, voice barely audible. Real feelings. And I want you too. He held her close, as if sealing the promise without paper, without signature, without hesitation. And in that moment, the billionaire had crossed the line, and Lena had finally let him. More stories will keep coming, so please don't forget to ND, subscribe,